Hi, this is a video that goes along with lab number 4, which is identifying common minerals. This is for activity 1, where you are given 5 minerals and you have to identify what their name is by using your reference table and these 5 minerals and making some observations. Hopefully you have already done questions 1 through 22 and you are at question 23, which we're going to walk through activity 1 and you fill in the chart as you go along. So it starts with you have to identify a mineral's luster. Let's review luster. You have 2 choices, metallic or non-metallic. Metallic simply means looks like a metal. Non-metallic means looks like it is not a metal. After you do luster, you have to determine the hardness. You'll be given a piece of glass, and you'll also have to use your fingernail to identify how strong minerals are. Remember, if you can scratch the glass, the mineral has a hardness less, scratch that, haha, pun intended. If the mineral can scratch the glass, then it has a hardness greater than the glass, which is 5.5. If your fingernail can scratch the mineral, then the mineral has a hardness less than your fingernail, and your fingernail is 2.5. After you determine the hardness, you have to decide if it has cleavage or fracture. Remember, cleavage is when it breaks in straight, flat edges. Fracture is when it's uneven or jagged. Finally, you will use a streak plate to scratch the mineral across a piece of porcelain tile to determine if it leaves behind a colored powder. Some minerals also have some distinguishing characteristics, such as they are magnetic, they have a greasy feel, some smell bad, some have perfectly cubic cleavage, others are flexible and thin sheets, some bubble with acid. We will be doing some of those tests today to see if your mineral does any of those things. So we'll start off with mineral number 1. So you have to decide, is this mineral metallic or non-metallic? You can pause it and take a look if you need to. Then you move on to hardness. Can it scratch glass? So I'll just take a piece of glass, set it down, and go across the surface. And I know that might be hard to see, but even if I push off that powder, it does leave behind a scratch in the glass. I can also take my fingernail and attempt to scratch it. It does not scratch. So now you need to determine the hardness of mineral 1. You can take a look at mineral number 1. Does it break in straight, flat edges, or are they rough and jagged? Finally, we can do the streak. And you can see the streak that it leaves behind. You can take a look at this mineral. I can tell you that this mineral does not have a greasy feel. It does not smell bad. It does not have a salty taste. So hopefully you can find a distinguishing characteristic for that mineral. All right, that's mineral number 1. Mineral number 2, same process. Metallic or non-metallic? Hardness, I take a glass. Now that scratch is already there. Let's check out over here. Again, that was right there that I just did that. It did scratch glass, and I cannot scratch it with my fingernail. Now you need to determine if this has cleavage or fracture, so take a look at where it breaks. And we will try to test the streak. So you can determine, again, that one was already there. I scratched it there. So you can determine what its streak looks like. Taking a look at this, go through any distinguishing characteristics. Again, this is not stinky, so it doesn't smell bad. It doesn't have a salty taste. It does not have a greasy feel. So you can decide if that one has any of those distinguishing characteristics listed on your answer sheet. Mineral number 3. So while you're doing that, I just need to run back to the storage room and grab one thing. I will be right back with you. All right, mineral number 3. Metallic or non-metallic, you decide that. Hardness, I'm going to attempt to scratch it on the glass. So these 2 scratches are already there. Let's try up in the corner. And you can see I have nothing. Now I'm going to attempt to scratch it with my fingernail too. Also nothing. So my fingernail cannot scratch the mineral. Fingernail cannot scratch the mineral. Mineral cannot scratch the glass. So determine the hardness of mineral number 3. Take a look at mineral number 3. Is it cleavage or fracture? Streak. Here's a streak plate again. That black one's already there, so you should be able to see it. I don't know if you can see that, but it did leave behind like a white powder. Finally, distinguishing characteristics. This mineral does not smell bad. It does not have a greasy feel. It doesn't have a salty taste. I would like to point out, do you know what shape that is? It's kind of rectangular, but it's not a rectangle. That is a shape you've learned in math class. It's kind of like a pushed over rectangle. That has a special name. It is on the reference table if you want to take a look at that. Also, here is a bottle of hydrochloric acid. I'm going to take 1 drop of hydrochloric acid. I don't know if you can see that, but it's reacting much like hydrogen peroxide would react if you put hydrogen peroxide on a cut. So it is bubbling with acid. I'm just going to leave that there. I don't want to touch that. That's mineral number 3. Mineral number 4. You have to decide, is that metallic or non-metallic? Hopefully you can get a good look at that. Metallic or non-metallic? Hardness. I do want to point out this mineral, it's not super big, but it is way, way heavier than even this rock. So even though this one's smaller, this one in my right hand does way more. It's very, very dense. So I'm going to now check if it scratches glass. So again, these 2 scratches are already there, and I attempt to scratch, and I got nothing. This is very surprising to a lot of my students in class, because you would think this would scratch glass, but it does not scratch glass. Try to scratch it with my fingernail. And my fingernail can just barely leave behind some marks. So in some places it can't, and some places it can. So use that knowledge to take a look at your reference table to determine its hardness. Breakage. Hopefully while I was holding this, you noticed some specific breakage, but I also want to point out right there. So even though this is a little jagged, take a look at that break though. You should notice that it goes straight down and straight over. So is that cleavage or fracture? Followed by streak. Here's a streak, nice and clean. Scratch it on there. There's its streak. Distinguishing characteristics. I did already mention that this is very, very dense. That's one interesting characteristic. But you should also notice something about its shape and where it breaks. It always breaks in this specific shape. One of your distinguishing characteristics matches up very nicely with that one. Finally, we have mineral number 5. That's this one. Everybody is always like, that's a piece of mineral. It looks like plastic. It almost looks like a overhead transparency, if you remember those from the olden days. It's just very thin and very flexible. It's bendy, much like a piece of plastic sheeting might be bendable. All right, so you need to decide if this is metallic or non-metallic. Hopefully I can get a good view for you. So you'll notice it's very shiny, but my students should know that shiny isn't always a great characteristic. So metallic or non-metallic. After that, we need to determine the hardness. I'm going to try to scratch this, but absolutely no, it can't scratch glass. But if I run my fingernail across that, You can see that it scratched it big time. So my fingernail scratched this mineral. Hopefully you may have noticed whether this has cleavage or fracture while I've been holding it. As long as it's got cleavage somewhere, it's considered cleavage, even though all sides might not be cleaved. Finally, streak. I think you can imagine that this wimpy little thing, but there you go. It is not leaving behind anything. Distinguishing characteristics, this does not smell bad. It does not taste funny. It's not magnetic. However, take a look at how bendy it is. That might be helpful. All right, so you're going to use all of this information, put it together, put it on your reference table, and you should be able to identify the names of these 5 minerals. If you have any questions, be sure to contact myself, Mrs. Ritz, or Mr. Miga or Mr. Winters with any questions you might have. So once you identify all these names, make sure you fill it out in the forms and finish up the rest of the questions. Turn it in when you are 100% sure you are ready for it to be graded.